Howdy, howdy, y'all. Welcome back to some Antics. It is great to be back. I was out last week because of the great Texas freeze, but it's good to be back with power, with warmth, with internet, with all the things, and with you all, of course. Today, I am joined by my friend Michael Chan. You might know him around the interwebs as Chantastic. Michael, go ahead and tell us about yourself.
Hey. I, I'm resisting the urge to ask you how you're doing in Texas. So we can circle back. We're gonna put a pin in that, and we'll
All
circle
right.
back to it. Um, yeah. So I'm Michael Chan. Go by Chantastic most of the places, and yeah, I am. Ben hit me up and was like, if you ever want to be on the show, you should come on. And I was like, I don't really know anything about accessibility. You're the one who teaches me about accessibility all the time. I know semantic markup and all that kind of stuff, but I'm just not an expert. And then I kind of remembered, and we talked about this a little bit. I remembered like, oh my gosh, like I spent like weeks trying to get our SVGs accessible in React, our icons accessible in React. And I learned a lot through that process. I guess this is something that I might know about. And you're like, yeah, let's do it. So here we are. I think I want to like preface all of this by saying like I am by no means an expert on this, but uh, I think I've put in a lot of time, read a lot of articles that I think we could I can help people get to a better starting point. And then I'm like eager to see what people learn and kind of contribute back to this because I think this is a solid starting point. But there's always ways that we can improve the things that we're working on.
Absolutely. And to preface this as well, of like I have very little experience with accessible SVGs, so I'm super excited. I feel like I'm about to learn a lot from this. So um, I think that's so much of what accessibility is, right? Is there? It's not even that there is the way. That it's not always that there is the right thing to do, but just general concerns, and we're just always kind of like ambling towards like ambling in the direction of progress.
Yes.
Um, and so yeah, we are two dudes who don't necessarily know a whole lot about this and just have our own limited experience, but I'm excited to see this. I'm excited to see this journey here that we've got.
I like the word
Yeah,
ambling. I don't know if I've ever noticed that word before. I,
it's a
I
good
assume
one.
it's related to rambling, but maybe with more
Oh,
intentionality. I don't know. That's interesting.
interesting. Yeah, so before we hop into this, I want to share a few places that you can find Chan throughout the web. First of all, we've got his Twitter at Chantastic. Let me dump the bird site link into the chat. Um, you, I think kind of the thing that you're most known for, perhaps, is that you run the React podcast,
Yes,
which is on a bit of a hiatus right now, but I'll still send the link.
that is
Um,
correct.
yeah, and kind of talk to us about some of the things you're doing like during that hiatus. What have you been working on?
Yeah, so the
Still send the link.
okay, I sorry, I just opened up Twitch because I wanted to see, chat and then I
Mm-hmm.
forgot. I had to pause real quick. Yeah, so the network that React Podcast is on, Spec decided to close its doors at the end of 2020. And it's funny, it takes a surprising amount of work to like produce a podcast. I kind of totaled it up and it takes about like 16 hours of human time to like produce a single episode of React podcast. And I think I was doing about 8 of that and then they were doing the other 8 of that, or like we were, contracting it out or whatever. And I just when they decided to close, like I couldn't bring that other 8 into my life. Like there was no place for it to fit. So I'm kind of just figuring out what the next phase of it's going to look like. It's definitely going to have to be like reduced to some degree. But I think it'll be good. I think it'll be better. I'm not exactly sure what it looks like right now, but hopefully sometime in like April, May, we're going to start with new episodes. Um, and then in the interim, I wanted to kind of get a better sense of kind of where people were at, and so started the lunch.dev like community Discord. I wanted to get more coursework out there because I've just not done anything in a really long time. So kind of put some stuff back online. I'm trying to kind of round out some of the stuff that I've been working on because React Podcast has just really taken up my life for the last 2.5 years. So yeah, just trying to figure that out, figure out my content game, kind of outside of React Podcast. It's kind of a rambly answer, but figuring out all that stuff.
All right, and then I put a link to the lunch.dev. So if you're going to be releasing a course on modules there, and then
Yep.
one last thing is the Discord. Talk to us a bit about the
Yes.
Discord.
Oh my gosh. So it's so funny. So this started with Joe Warren, who um he hit me up and he's like, "Hey, where's the like React podcast community?" And I was like, I don't there is not one. It's just people listen to the show and maybe they hang out places." Um and so yeah, so we just kind of were like, "Well, why don't we like start a Discord? Even if it's just like you and me, we'll just like hang out and get to know each other a little bit and we'll kind of listen to episodes together and just kind of have a good time with that." And it's just been fun and it's been growing. You showed up and really kind of took the reins and like kind of giving us a project. The You might want to pull that up actually, like the
Yeah.
events.lunch.dev 11 page. We've been working on that together and doing streams and like everybody's learning and teaching, and it's been like an incredibly fun environment to just hang out with people, get to know people, and then learn from the things that they've taken a lot of time to learn, which is effectively what we're doing today, which is great.
Hmm. All right. Well, cool. So yeah, today we're going to be doing accessible SVG icons in React, building an accessible SVG icon system. I just realized that the closed captions have not been enabled this whole time. I'm gonna fix that real quick, but in the meantime, I have a quick question for you, which
Yes.
is what makes an icon accessible? It's a bit of a big one. What makes an icon
uh,
accessible?
you got to start with the big guns, open-ended questions. So this is something that's really interesting because, and again, I want to preface, I am not an expert and definitely don't know all of the right terms. However, there are a lot of things that have to be considered when you're thinking about an icon versus an image, right? So, there's images and you can have like an SVG image. Um, and those typically you want them to be able to like something that would make an image accessible is to kind of describe the image and sometimes in like great detail. So you might have a title for an image that says like what the image is kind of like in the abstract. But then you'd also have a description that says that really goes into detail on like describing the image. So maybe you have a West Coast sunset over the ocean with oranges and purple sky and a preface of sand. I don't know. Like you'd want to go into like great detail to like actually describe the image. Um, Now what we're talking about today is like accessible icons, and it's kind of a unique thing difference that I'd not really considered, but like so often like you have an icon set and the icons are augmenting some text, and a lot of times like the value of the actual image, the thing that you would describe, like star for example, you'd have title star and then you'd have description like a five pointed geometric shape with, I don't know, however you would describe like a star, um, like illustration of what an astronomical figure might look like, right? Like there's like so many like ways that you could go about it. But the thing is that like that's actually not particularly useful in context. A star usually represents like on a list of things, this is one of your favorited articles or favorited tweets or and so there becomes this kind of like this nuance that you have to figure out as a designer, as a developer on a per case basis
Hmm.
of like what is the usefulness, like what does this mean, and then is there already some text that communicates that to the point that like we don't even need to tell them that there's an icon on the page, um or or communicate to the screen reader that there's an icon on the page. So these are the things that kind of like make icons like fairly nuanced even among like images or SVG images. that we'll be covering today, and making kind of an API around that so that it's fairly easy to opt into the best practices. Um,
Mhm.
but I think, and this part doesn't really answer your question, but I think it bears like being a theme today, which is nothing that we will do today is a provides an out of the box, like one size fits all accessibility like treatment for all of your icons. We can only create some tooling that allows you to make the best decision for your users on a case by case basis. And we'll kind of like see a little bit about why that distinction is important.
Absolutely. So yeah, picking up two takeaways from that so far. A, we're not going to be able to do a one size fits all, and B, A is because of this distinction between the literal versus the functional.
Mm. Yeah, I think that yeah, I think that that's right. Is that's icons really, that's a good way to put it actually. A literal description of your icons is not always helpful to
Mhm.
users.
All right, so let's go ahead and get started. We're in React land, so I'm gonna spin up a generic create React app project. I'm gonna do that with npx create React app. I'm
Not
just
a
gonna
typo. NPX.
let's see. Did it? Oh, do I have to do the? Interesting. Please hold. I need like hold
Thing.
music or something, you know?
If you had a little soundboard, this would be a good play. Hold music would be a good thing to have on there.
There we go. I am going to Google. For some reason, npx create React app isn't working, and I think it's because I'm not supplying a template. So let's see. Well, huh. All right. Well, what I'm gonna do then is just give it a name, and we'll have a bit of a nested directory.
No worries. And so like right now we're sharing this directory, which is kind of the we're live sharing.
Oh,
Is it a version thing? Do you need to, well, you should
maybe
have the latest version with NPX, right?
that's what I would think.
Do you have a global installation? I think maybe, did you
Heading.
run that install?
Yeah, I did run this. We'll see. Fun stuff. Up to date. I wouldn't say up to date if I'm uninstalling. Let's try Yarn as well. Yarn could be. Oh, look at that. Yarn's doing some stuff. What if I just Yarn create React app in the current directory? Aha! Look at that.
There's another way to do it. So many ways to do anything these days.
Adrian is excited for some antics to expand brand to sound effects and hold music. Um, might have to might have to make that happen.
Yeah. I'm super interested in how to actually accomplish this. I've been curious as well because in trying to think about, as we discussed earlier, and while our yarn happens, I've been trying to think about like how to make the React podcast take less time. I have been thinking about a soundboard and like kind of like running my
Yeah.
music through it and whatnot, but like I don't want like a soundboard necessarily like a complicated thing. Like I don't know, maybe an iPad thing. I'm open to suggestion. I think we both need some sound in our life.
There we go. Um, oh, look at
Joe Moore,
that.
DJ.
Fascinating. Uh, yeah, I was so tempted to take the whole not the whole music, the theme music for React podcast, and as soon as you started talking, to start playing that just like deep grungy bass. Um, but I figured I did not have the rights to that, so I am not going to tempt the Twitch gods. All right, so I'm running. This is just a basic Create React App project. If you've ever done anything with Create React App, you've seen this before. It's got the little rotating atom. It's got the link. And this atom itself is an SVG. So we're going to kind of cheat here. I'm going to Actually, do you want to explain why
Yeah,
we're
sure.
cheating with the
Yeah, I'd be
SVG?
happy to explain that. So what happens in Create React, and we can actually look at the code here. Create React app um, actually imports. So there's a Webpack step. I don't even know where we would find it, but in the was it app.js? I think you could probably find the import statement at least. They're using like a Webpack like converter to get a link, basically get a URL string or a yeah URL from this loaded logo.svg. So you do import logo from logo.svg, which is a standard SVG file. And then I think you can look on line 8. It's just putting source is the logo, which gets it's a URL string. Um, so now we are going to cheat a little bit in that we're just going to inline that SVG. And the only reason we're doing it is just because there's not like there's so many ways to load SVGs into your app. And what we're covering today is not necessarily the SVGs themselves, but the kind of wrapper that you're going to create to make them accessible. And so we're going to treat the SVGs effectively as an opaque source. So you can load them in however you want. But we're going to focus on the SVG wrapper. So we just want to bring it in line so we can see all of that happen inside of this one file.
Mm-hmm. And to do that, you've already pulled out. I've got Firefox maximized there. You've already pulled out the SVG so that we can inline it. I put the link to this in the chat.
Perfect.
But yep, we will be able to just copy this and replace our image here.
Yeah, and I wanted to have a diff there, so like to be clear that there's not like a magic happening here, except for the fact that we're moving this SVG into React land.
We can nuke the import. I'm just
Yeah,
going to save this so we can validate that everything is still working. Awesome.
cool.
So what's next for us, or
Yeah,
why is this SVG incomplete?
yeah. Okay, so this is really interesting. The this SVG, and so I actually added on line 12 a title, which is kind of representative of what we were getting from Adobe Illustrator, which is where all of our icons lived. Now, I had felt, in my ignorance, like, okay, well, Illustrator is providing the title for this icon, and so we're good, right? Like
Mhm.
accessibility solved. Like we got the title, and even and I don't know, this is just me like wanting to not have to solve this problem effectively, right? Because our icon names are named by like, ridiculous things like encircled star like outline. They're like some things that are completely unhelpful when read aloud. So anyway, but I have a dash in there to represent like this is what we were getting. Now, if you don't mind,
Yeah.
take line 12 out, and this kind of represents what happened to kind of get me thinking about, well, we have to solve this problem now. Is that Adobe, in an effort to like clean up their SVGs and kind of like make them smaller, took out title and description. So anytime you exported, like now they didn't have those. And now we had a real problem, which was like now we had to like solve this thing. So that's kind of like the point that like kind of the point that like got us into like, well, like I guess we gotta like figure this out for ourselves. Um Now, before we dive into like this, so this is kind of the state of the world that we're going to be working with. But before we dive into this, I was hoping that we could take a look at the dev tools, the accessibility dev tools in either Chrome or both Chrome and Firefox. Um,
Which one you want to start with? I guess we've already got the page up in Chrome.
yeah,
Let's start
let's
with
open
Chrome.
up in Chrome. Actually, I think going from Chrome to Firefox is actually it will be nice because
Yeah.
the Firefox ones I tend to prefer. And you can probably see why after seeing the Chrome ones.
All right. So where do you want to go in the dev tools?
So yeah, so I think it's in so you would go into the elements pane, and then it's in one of those sub panes right next to property. It's always hidden. You have
Mhm.
to hover over at the thing and then click accessibility. And then it works with your elements inspector. So you're going to have to drill down into header in your elements
Okay.
to actually target the SVG. So you can tap that. And now we can see that there are certain properties that it's reporting on. And this is how it's going to report information to the screen readers. Now, how screen readers handle that is kind of like up to the screen reader, but this is kind of a summary of what it will be reporting based on the properties that are available. So you can see like title's one of them, ARIA label and ARIA labeled by is one of them. Now we're going to focus on title and ARIA labeled by today.
All right.
So that's that. Now Firefox, it's kind of the same thing, but they have a total their own pane, which is kind of nice, and they do something that I think is super helpful in debugging these experiences.
Okay. So I'm gonna right click and I see inspect element, but I also see inspect accessibility properties. I'm guessing we're going to this one.
That, yeah, they're ready to go for you.
Let's see. Is there a way I can like write a line? It'll be fine. Okay. So we have our landmark. This landmark has. I'm guessing it's a diagram.
Yes.
All right.
Now, something that's interesting about this right away that I like is that Firefox actually gives you these warnings. So it says like, it shows that there's no contents for this like image to be read, which is awesome, actually. And this is actually a little bit closer to the experience that you would get with some type of reporting system like Axe. If you run it on your page, it'll actually kind of surface these areas, but these are just built into the dev tools. And so that's one of the reasons I really like Firefox for this is that the like reporting is a little bit better. And then also they show you in the properties on the bottom right, show you the description as well, which is another tag that we can fill out in these SVGs. So I don't know how deeply we want to go into this, but if we opened up VoiceOver right now, I don't think with the image being a diagram that we can actually get to it.
Let's try it. And of course, live demos of VoiceOver with a video call are always an adventure, but
Totally.
let's see what we can do. I'll try and pull something off here. So I'm opening up VoiceOver. VoiceOver, if you're unfamiliar, is Mac's built-in screen reader, which can be used by people who are blind, low vision, dyslexic, etc. People who just need extra tooling to be able to really understand what's on your page. Perhaps because they can't see it or read it for whichever disabilities. So I'm going to turn on VoiceOver. That's Command F5 is the way to do that. And it's going to think for a minute. It's going to be a little delayed, I think. Welcome, Michael. Good to have you.
VoiceOver on system preferences, accessible, Firefox, React app, window, React app, web content.
So, yeah, because the diagram is static content, it's not focusable, it's not expected to be interactive in any way. The way I'm going to try to navigate to it, see if this works, is I would do Control, Option, and then the arrow keys. There's different ways you can navigate a page using a screen reader. It's really going to depend on the screen reader that you've got, but Control, Option, and then the arrow keys is basically VoiceOver's way to get to like anything that you can get to. Static or interactive. So I'm going to try that.
React app, web content. React app, web content.
Let's see, drill down.
Out of React app, web content.
Gonna cheat and click into
Edit src/app, selected, image. You are currently on an image.
Okay, so it looks like it did work here, but interesting. So I was using it last night in maybe it was Safari or something. I was not able to actually like get to the image through navigation. And I guess you did technically cheat by like clicking on it. So maybe I didn't do that. But I want to kind of go into the code and change the first property that we need to change in order to get this to show up to be selectable as an image.
Okay. I'll kill VoiceOver real quick.
VoiceOver off.
Back in the code. So what do we need to change? What do we need to change to get this working?
Yeah, so the first thing that we're going to do is that on the SVG element itself, we want to add an image. We want to add a role image. I think I typed this backwards in my notes. Yeah, I definitely did. Image equals role. That doesn't make any sense. So we're going to do this. And now, at least in my test, this made it navigable if being navigable is an important thing. Now, again, this is something that you're going to have to decide on a case by case basis, like whether or not you want it to be navigable. But this is how you kind of transition it from one to another.
Absolutely. So what this is doing here, do you want to kind of explain what role is in general?
Actually, don't I don't know if I'd be qualified to really say. I know that there's like the diagram is kind of like the default of like an SVG. And then there's image, which makes it read a little bit more like an actual, like a proper image. And then there's presentation, which I think is kind of what you would use to make it be like as augmenting text that's also on the page. But I'd let you clarify that because I'm not an expert on that.
Yeah, I just put a link to a blog post I have on
Cool.
ARIA in general, but role is the cue that the browsers use to decide what kind of control to expose an element as. So that could be image or presentation or diagram. It could be button, link, depending on really what it is. Semantic elements all have their own implicit roles that they'll use by default. But in certain cases, if you're absolutely confident in what you're doing, you can override that role. So you can tell the browser, hey, I want you to expose this as an entirely different kind of control to assistive technology. So here we're saying, yes, I know it's an SVG. I know SVGs are by default diagrams, but I want you to lie to assistive technology and tell it that it's actually an image.
Yeah. Yep. The lying of Aria.
All right. So this is now a role. Should we see anything meaningfully different about
Yeah,
the
so I
SVG?
think that we don't, I mean, I don't think we need to necessarily take an additional step to test it, but um, in in my experience, now this gives us a control for whether or not this is navigable. So, like, if it's really important that this be navigable, you can, kind of like use this role to do that. Um, and again, this is kind of like a question, like, maybe you have an icon all by itself. I think that in practice, a navigable icon is usually a button, in which case you would probably wrap it in a button and then have that be the navigable item. Um, but again, every app is a little bit different, but I think that's probably the best practice there. Um, so yeah, so let's jump into some of the Reacty part of this,
Okay.
which is to like actually extract this wrapper, this SVG into something that we can kind of use repeatedly and kind of let's start building that up. So I would just copy and paste what we have from line 7 to I think 12. So just the kind of like head
Okay.
part of that, and then make a new component for that. And we can call this icon whatever makes sense.
I'm gonna go ahead and do this in the same file so that we can scroll back and
Yeah.
forth. All right. We're gonna return us an SVG.
Yep. And
Cool.
so we'll probably take children and then also the rest props. So we'll destructure from the object, the props object, children, and then, yeah, perfect.
All right.
So we'll pop children down there. And then there's a very last prop we'll spread out with JSX, what is it? Rest adders, the rest. Now, one of the values of having this at the end is that if you put, role equals presentation on your component, like at the call site, now that's going to override the role image here. And we didn't have to really do like a song and dance to like make that happen. One thing that we'll want to take off is the class name app logo, because that's a very specific thing for this specific icon.
Okay.
And then we'll just put that kind of down at the place that we're using it, line 20. We'll leave it there. I guess we didn't need to copy and paste it. We'll leave it there. So let's change this to icon.
Go ahead and... Yep, so we got ourselves a lovely icon component, passing it the class name. Are we gonna pass other props, or should I go ahead and like collapse this into one line?
Yeah, actually, we are gonna pass other props. So let's do the first step. So instead of jumping back into code kind of a bunch of times, let's just do the first step of actually providing a title as props.
Okay.
And so the reason that we're doing it on icon is that, again, we're treating this SVG source as kind of like an opaque image. And so we want to like kind of be able to like write this title as like a prop on our icon, so that we can kind of tell it from the outside, like, you know, what you're doing, your SVG thing, presenting an image, but like we're going to actually control the title. So on icon, let's kind of write the code that we want, which is, you know, title React logo, this time with like proper spaces and capitalization, which is great, instead of just the React dash logo that we got from by default from Adobe Illustrator. And then let's build that up now. So let's jump back to our component.
All right.
And this is going to be a sibling of whatever the children are passed in. We're going to actually add a title element above children.
All right, so it's gonna look like that.
Yep. And then we'll destructure title off and then interpolate that value. And then one additional thing that I'll do is that basically if there is no title given, we're not gonna just have an empty title tag. So I would wrap this in a conditional and just say like title and yeah, perfect.
That's a whole lot of title, Chan.
I know, right? That's a lot of title. So why don't we at this phase check this out in the browser and see what we get.
Okay. Chrome or Firefox?
I think Firefox is the closest one, so let's do that. We should see that error go away, which will be nice or satisfying, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so we got landmark. It says graphic now instead of diagram. That's pretty cool. It's got this name React logo that's using our lovely formatted version, and yeah, I can see all those properties over here to the right as well. Name React logo. It has changed the role to graphic, which I find kind of interesting, but yeah.
Oh, interesting.
It's even got our class and everything.
Okay, cool, perfect. Now we don't see a description in there, so let's take a second and do the same thing on repeat, but with description.
Okay.
So we'll add, yeah.
Go ahead.
So we'll add a description. Now this is like, again, we kind of talked about the role of descriptions, and like I don't necessarily think that you're going to want a description on most icons. However, you might need it. So I guess, I mean, I don't know what a proper description, like a 2D illustration of an atom with 3 electrons. Does that properly describe this image?
Perhaps signifying React JS. There we go. If it's got 3 electrons, does that mean it's lithium?
Might be. That explains a lot about how I feel when I'm programming React sometimes.
All right, so we're passing a description prop now, and if I had to take a guess as to what we're gonna do, we're gonna destructure our description, and then we're gonna conditionally, if we're provided a description, well, it's auto-completing desk. Do I use desk?
Right.
Okay. That's exciting.
Now, the reason I'm adding this is mostly just because I want to be like very verbose, and it's going to play into how we do the ARIA label and get both if we want them. And again, this is about options so that like you can have the option if you need it.
Yeah, it's very much so pit of success type, right? Like
Yes,
if we didn't allow for this, then that we would be cutting off options for accessibility for our developers down the road who are like presumably pulling in this icon. Um,
exactly.
yeah.
Exactly. So let's save this and then let's take a look. Let's make sure, validate in Firefox that we're getting the description now.
Okay, I'll refresh this. Looks like it's getting our description.
Okay, cool. Now let's jump into Chrome and I want to show you because Chrome doesn't honor the description, which creates a pretty big problem for us.
Okay. So I'm gonna inspect this. I've got the accessibility tree up. We've got our image. Yeah, okay, so there's no description here. Nothing
Yep,
going on.
it's just title, which is kind of frustrating.
Hmm. Yeah, there's missing information that some browsers don't expose. Okay.
Yes. Now, I've done quite a bit of research on this, trying to figure out how to bring these into parity.
Hmm.
And I found an article. I think I might have. I have it in my notes. Let me see if I can paste a link to it real quick. But the article goes into pretty great detail of like how to. I just gotta pull up my branch. How to make browsers work similarly to honor both the description, to read similarly, right? So we're gonna do again a little bit more of that ARIA lying to tell the browsers kind of the same story for all of them.
Okay.
Let me jump into. I just want to make sure that people get this article because I do find it interesting. It's very old. It's like 2013, but
Hmm.
you can see even in these two up-to-date modern web browsers, there are discrepancies. So worth a read.
Absolutely.
Um, okay, I think I found it. So I'm gonna post this into the Twitch chat.
Good deal.
Okay. Oh, sorry.
I was just saying good deal. I'm gonna pull this up too so that you can kind of see this. All right.
Yeah, so this goes into great detail about like how you would use ARIA labeled by to now connect the like to connect the title and description so that they get read properly in all of the in or get read predictably across the browsers and operating systems. And so you can see in there it's doing like the role image ARIA labeled by title and desk, and then in title and desk, because it's not referring to the attributes, it's referring to IDs, you have to ID title and desk. So
Hmm.
we're going to do exactly as it says right here, to kind of get that to work.
Awesome. And I see that this is by Leonie Watson, who's awesome. She puts forth some great work in the accessibility space. So
Yeah.
yeah, I can already tell that I'm gonna be reading this article in my free time. All right. So yeah, walk me through
Yeah.
how
So
we're doing this.
yeah, so the big thing is we're just going to take a couple steps now where let's see, in our React component, so let's say on line 8, um, we're going to say we're going to add a attribute aria labeled by, aria dash labeled by together. Perfect. And then in that, we're going to give it a string that includes some IDs.
Okay.
Now I'm going to lead, that we're going to have like lead just right off the gate that we're going to have to change some of this to account for them being IDs. But for right now, let's do something to like really indicate that these are IDs, not the elements, and do like icon dash title and icon dash desk,
Okay.
and then add those IDs to your title and description.
Um, I can spell. I promise I can spell. The curse of live development is A, your demo doesn't work. B, you can't spell.
It's so hard to type. Okay, cool. So we have this now, and what we're effectively doing is that we're telling we're telling the we're saying communicating to screen readers that we actually don't want to we want to disregard the default behavior of the title and description, and we want to use the aria labeled by, and then it's giving it the text from those nodes. So again, some of that like lying, but like for the benefit of making it more consistent. um and then let's check that out and see if we got it right.
Okay, doke. Save this. And well, I guess I'll actually pull this up in Chrome because Chrome is the problem browser of the day, isn't it? Oh, interesting. Okay, so I can already see that it's got our SVG here. It's got this name, which is React logo 2D illustration of an atom with 3 electrons specifying React JS. Like that is both our title and our description.
Yes. Yep. So we've been able to have it read the full title and description. And then if you go in there, it actually has some really interesting visual cues. Tap on image again.
Ah, okay.
There you go. Where it shows you the actual selectors that are being used. So we have like title, you know, ID, icon title, or whatever, and it's showing you how it's composing this kind of statement together.
All right.
Which is cool. So now the problem that we have now is that we haven't, these IDs are like IDs, and you're only supposed to have one ID on the page.
So if I were getting clever, right, and I were to duplicate this, we'd have an accessibility defect because we now have duplicate IDs, right? Because both of these icons are rendering the same thing. Why are they like slightly out of sync with each other? That's amazing.
Yeah, and is it just me, or is the top one look thicker?
It could be. I doubt it, but it could be. That's amazing.
It's like one of those visual tricks, I guess.
There we go. Yeah. I didn't realize I was bringing MC Escher onto the stream. Okay.
Cool. So yeah, so now we have a problem where we have two things that we're clobbering like the same ID.
Yeah,
Now,
it's got icon title here, and then down this one we've got icon title again.
Yeah, and this is an area where like I really wanted to like bury my head in the sand and be like, oh well, you know, SVG is kind of like an isolated document, and so like it shouldn't be a problem. But in our testing, it was in fact a problem. And I don't have a lot of that information available right now, but like we ran some tests. I could probably find a pull request or whatnot, but Michael G says it does look bolder to him as well. So at least we're both like out of our mind in the same way. So yeah, so we have to solve this ID thing, and this is kind of where the UI library becomes really important. Because we need a way to provide a unique ID. And that's going to happen like in React or Vue or Svelte or I've built a wrapper like this in Rails. This has to happen dynamically if you don't want to like have to provide like come up with a unique ID for like every icon on your page. So this is a really good use case for a UI library to abstract this for you and automatically increment the ID, because the ID itself doesn't matter. It just needs to be unique so that ARIA labeled by can actually connect the dots.
Okay.
So let's jump back into our code.
Yep.
And there's so many ways that you can get a unique ID, and I'm really excited because eventually React has already merged this, but eventually React will have a hook. I think it's called like you use opaque identifier.
Really? Oh
Yeah.
man, that's exciting. I had not heard of that.
Yeah, I mean it's a huge accessibility win. I think actually let me get up the pull request for that.
Yeah. Oh man, that's cool.
Yeah, it was merged but not exposed yet.
Okay.
And it's even the demo that they give is effectively for this exact case, which is the ARIA labeled by.
That's awesome. Yeah. Because like I know that there are, and this is probably how we're about to solve this, is like there are unique identifier like libraries that we could pull in npm modules or something. But yeah, it's nice to have that primitive like in the in React itself.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. It'll be amazing to have a hook that does this for us, because it's one less thing that we'll have to kind of reach outside of React to do
Okay.
for an extremely common use case. Now, what I've done is I just pasted in, this is the underscore kind of like isolated unique ID creator. This is largely what you're going to get if you use underscore, if you use Lodash and use just Lodash dot, what is it? Unique ID. It's almost exactly this, except with like a string validator inserted in there. So this is a very common approach to generating unique IDs, and it's like, 4 lines effectively.
Yeah, and so it's just you've got a globally scoped. I mean, relative to our
Yep.
project, it's basically global in this case. Um, we've got a globally scoped variable, and just every time we call this, we increment it. So every component's gonna get its own ID from that. That's
Yep.
pretty cool.
Yeah. It's super neat, and that prefix allows you to create a prefix if you wanted to like give it the icon name or something,
Ah, I like that. Yeah.
which is really cool. So in our case, we're just above the return. So like on line 10, we're gonna want to do a couple things, which is create a unique ID
Okay.
each time we render an icon. So we can assign that to like UID or something like that.
All right, and I'm just gonna call unique ID
Yep.
with, you know what? I'll pass it the title as our prefix. Well, no, because title could have spaces, and I don't think ID should. Yeah.
Yeah. We can just leave it. Yeah, icon's great. And so from there, we're going to prefix these anyway on our own.
Okay.
I think it makes sense to add 2 new variables. So we're going to do let test, or sorry, test title, and then we'll do a what is that? A string template literal.
Okay.
And here, like we can do icon dash title,
Icon
and
dash.
then interpolate our unique ID.
Oh, I see. Yeah,
Yeah,
I was
just
about
like
to do that the other way around, I think. I see.
Yeah, and either way works. I mean, again, we're just constructing like some kind of unique ID.
I'm reading between the lines and skipping to the next one, so we've got that too.
Excellent, looking great. And then we're just going to replace any place that we're using those with these values.
All right, so this is title ID. This is description. I need the. There we go.
Yeah, cool.
And then here, we need to call both of these. So title ID, description ID.
Yep.
Rad.
Yeah. Now, what we've done is, I mean, hopefully predictable at this point, but basically we've made this dynamic in such a way that it's going to auto increment an ID for us and hook it up in such a way that we've now separated all of our icons, and they're not sharing an ID anymore. Let's see. So yeah, we can test that if we want, or we can keep moving forward. What do you think?
Let's just make sure real quickly. Yeah, I'll look here. Okay, so up here, it seems like we've got some re-rendering going on, but I can see that we've got everything here is icon 2 for our top one, and then down here everything is icon 4. I don't know why. That's really interesting to me that like it's skipping 1 and 3 there, but I'm sure there's a programmatic reason for it.
Yeah, that is a little bit odd. I'm curious myself. But I mean, I guess for the sake of this example, as long as they're unique,
Yep.
you probably use a different library if you felt like maybe that was gonna solve the issue.
Yeah, we're good. Okay, so what's next? What limitations do we still have?
Yeah, let me consulting my notes right here. I feel like we've actually done most of it, which I'm kind of surprised by. Oh crap. Okay. I realized that these notes are insufficient. Okay, so we added that. Um, Now, what I want to do is actually kind of go into testing these things like with and without provided titles and descriptions, kind of
Okay.
in various states, because seeing how that works is going to be important. Now, I think that what, given that our title and description are merged together, theoretically, a developer should be able to provide a title or a description
Mhm.
or them together and have effectively the same output to the user.
Okay. I'm also a little surprised that we did tie them together. Like I would expect, I guess, and I haven't read Leone's article, but I would expect that we would pull the description ID out to Aria described by rather than labeled by.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, and I mean, again, this might be an area where, kind of the age of the article,
Oh yeah,
advancements, kind of recent advancements that we could like take this even further.
interesting. All right, yeah, let's go ahead and just test the combination. So first of all, we've got with title and description. We've only got the one icon now, but Chrome or Firefox.
Oh, I think either at this point because we've kind of circumvented the deficiency there. So
Okay.
whichever is your preference.
Let's do Firefox. It's closer, and it does have some nice dev tools here. Let's expand this. We've got the graphic. So this says React logo 2D illustration signifying React.js. By where is my full voiceover dialogue? Let's turn voiceover back on. Let's try.
Voiceover on system preferences.
Okay.
Firefox, React, navigation, React app, web content. T, selected. React logo 2D illustration of an atom with 3 electrons signifying React.js image. 2D illustration of an atom with 3 electrons signifying React.js. You are currently on an image.
All right, so that seems to be working. We're getting the React logo. We're getting the description. We're getting both of those. That's pretty awesome. What's the next combination we should test?
Sweet. So I think
Voiceover off.
since we only have like 8 minutes left, I want to jump through and make sure that we've done all of the things that we want to do. So
Okay.
let's take both of these off, and let's just know that effectively this is going to result in the same warning that we were getting before, because it's not titled or like described by anything.
Mm-hmm.
People can kind of validate that on their own, or we can do it real quick.
Oh, good. Yeah, I agree.
Okay, so we want like the equivalent of like an empty image or what is it? Empty alt tag.
Okay.
So that if you are in a position where like again, like a common case for this is like, you have the icon, but it's not actually providing anything if the text itself is red. And so what I've been using for this, since we're leaning heavily on ARIA, is just to put ARIA hidden on this. Now,
Okay.
because we're doing the spread, we can very specifically, oh, and just at the call site.
Oh, I see. I see what you mean. Okay. So we would put Aria hidden true.
Yep. Yep. And this is a way to communicate like we're intentionally not putting title and description on this. So a way to opt out of the I guess warning, I guess. So if you ran Axe over this page, like you'd get a warning saying like, hey, you need a title and describe this stuff. But this allows us to say like, I actually don't want to describe this because the text itself does a
Yeah.
good job of describing exactly what it is.
Yeah, a common example is if you have like a print button, for instance, and it's got the word print, but next to it's got a little like icon of a printer. That printer icon is adding no extra value. In fact, it's adding clutter. You want the button to just simply say print. So your printer is decorative, and this is how, with our component that we've got, our icon component, this is how you would indicate a decorative icon that doesn't need to be announced.
Yep. Absolutely. So yeah, so we can test that to make sure. Now, if we look at, I guess let's look at Firefox because that was the one that was actually reporting the warning.
Mm-hmm. All right, so I'll open up the accessibility properties again. All right. Yeah, so if I pop open the landmark, you can see that it no longer has a graphic, no longer has an image or diagram or anything like that. As far as the accessibility properties are concerned, our SVG no longer exists.
Yep.
which means that it's not going to risk cluttering up screen reader users' experience of the page.
Yeah. And again, this is kind of, it goes back to the I guess the main goal of what we were talking about, what we're talking about today is
Mhm.
icons are very like a very nuanced art. You know, like you were saying with the print button. Like you don't want it to say like, you know, print, you know, a picture of a printer that's, you know, a picture of an all-in-one printer with a tray and a yada 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 print. Like that's just clutter. Really what people want is to just see print and then tap that button and have it print. And so in the same way that we wouldn't just insert things that create a bunch of visual clutter, we don't want stuff that creates a lot of audio clutter either,
Mm-hmm.
or spoken clutter. And so this is this component that we've made gives us the tools to kind of go any direction that we need, but the decisions are really up to the designer and the developer to, like, on a case by case basis, actually use these tools that we've been using today, open up, you know, the voiceover or jaws or nvda or whatever you're testing in, and actually make sure that the experience in the spoken experience is as you want it and as clean as the visual experience.
Absolutely. Okay, is there anything else we need to do to improve our icons?
I think, you know, I think that's mostly it. I would definitely, like, kind of as a jumping off point, I'm very curious to see kind of your observation of
Mm,
if we use described by. I'd love to, I mean, I don't think we have time for it today, but I think it'd
yeah,
definitely be an interesting experiment down the road to see if we could improve the readability of this even further. Um,
I've
but
actually,
yeah,
I've actually got one more thing, and this is because we're putting it before the rest. It's totally overridable if people want, but that you should put a focusable equals false on most of your SVGs, and this is because Internet Explorer, weirdly enough, makes SVGs tabbable, and I mean, tabbing indicates interactivity, and so that's just not an accurate descriptor of most SVGs, and even interactive SVGs are usually like wrapped in button tags. So
interesting.
usually, you should put a focusable false by default on your SVGs. That's
Awesome. I'm gonna
one
have
more
to, I'm
thing.
gonna have to steal that and put that on our wrapper.
Absolutely. Anything else for us this afternoon? We've got
I
like
think
2 minutes.
Yeah, I think that's mostly it. I think if you want to kind of like peek all of the, I guess, like final code, I do have a branch that I can link. Um,
Yeah, let me.
or if you want to push it up, you can do that as well.
And then GH repo create semantics dev accessible SVGs in React. I think we're gonna make that public. Yes. God, the GitHub CLI is so cool.
So
Um,
good. So
yeah.
good.
And now I'll go ahead and dump this link in the chat for anyone who wants to look at our source code.
Yeah.
Um, which you virgin main. There we go. It's live.
Nice. Oh, you know what? There is one little thing. This is just like a bit of
Mhm.
like JavaScripty stuff. I'm just gonna paste it in. Um, and you can decide whether or not I'm trying to do it on your screen instead of the actual like editor. Give me a second. I'm gonna paste it in as a comment, and this
Okay.
can just be like for funsies for anyone who's interested.
Ah, you've got some conditional stuff.
Yes. So yeah. So if you anybody wants, they can kind of like take it a little bit
Mhm.
a step further. But yeah. So effectively, just like if there's a title, put the title ID. If there's a description, put the description ID, and then filter those out for booleans if you end up with an undefined in there. Um,
Absolutely.
and then just join them by a string. So just I think that's the only difference I have between my sample here and what we ended up on.
Well, super cool. Thank you so much. This has been so helpful. I've definitely learned a lot, and I'm going to be reading up Leonie's article too. That's awesome. Thank you so much for coming on. Next week,
Yeah.
you should join us. We've got Stephanie Eccles coming on. Stephanie does so much great stuff with CSS education, as well as with 11T, which, as y'all know, is my baby. I love 11T. And she's going to be showing off how to create a theme for Style Sage, which is a modern day successor for CSS Zen Garden. So we'll be taking a totally unstyled page, we'll be making it look pretty, we'll be learning all sorts of cool CSS tricks, I'm sure. So feel free to join us same time next Tuesday, 12 p.m. CST. I'm looking forward to that. Thank y'all so much for coming.